back to the SBP Podcast Mobile Filmmaking. I'm your host, Susie Botello, and you're listening to episode 111. Hey, we're back in the weeds with Jason C. Marshall. We are actually going to go back to the future. And I really do mean that. So what we're going to do for this episode for you is we started thinking that perhaps there might be some listeners out there who don't even really have a story yet. Even if you just have an idea just kind of cooking at the edge of your brain, you may not have the concept and all that ready to go. And so the last few episodes, Jason and I, we've been, well, mainly Jason, has been talking about the formula and the structure and beats and all these things. But, you know, that fits very well with you if you have already some sort of an idea. But if you don't, then let's go back into the future where you have an idea, and this episode will bring you before these last few episodes. If this is not making any sense, just hit replay. So let's talk to Jason. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, something horrible happened just a couple days ago on Friday. It's yesterday, basically. No, it's Thursday when it happened. October 21st in the afternoon, someone from our industry, Alina Hutchins, lost her life working on the set. And I really want to give my deepest and most sincerest condolences and sympathies to her family and her friends. I understand she has a husband and a young son. And so I just wanted to say that because, you know, not because everybody's talking about it, but because, as you know, I've also worked on film sets, and it's really hard for me to imagine something like that happening on one of the sets that I've worked on. And so I'm not here to discuss it. There's a lot going on social media and everything. It's a horrible tragedy, and I wish I could just go and hug everybody that was affected by this, but just know that we're all thinking of you. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hello, Susie. Thanks for having me back.
So Jason, do you want to go into a little more detail about what we're going to cover here?
Yeah, you actually covered it nicely, because we're taking a step back, because when we started doing this, I made an assumption in my head that, you know, people already had their story in mind and just need help structuring it. But then I was thinking, I'm like, well, what about the early stages? What about the listeners who don't even have that start? So we're gonna take a little bit step back, and we're gonna talk about the 3 or 4 elements you need to establish before you can even structure your story.
That sounds perfect. Yeah, we're thinking about our listeners because, you know, not everybody's on the same boat, you know, when it comes to this. So yeah, we really appreciate that, Jason. So let's go ahead and let's get started on that.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to talk about was the story gets thrown around. I feel like sometimes story gets thrown around like cinematic. It's become a buzzword that sometimes loses meaning. And so what I want to say is, when you're thinking of your script, whether it's a short film or a feature film or a series, do you want to tell a story or a situation? The difference being, in a story...
You know, I think also it might be helpful if we just say what a story is. Really, it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't always have to fall in that order, but that's really the concept of a story. If you're holding it in a box, it has those 3 elements to it.
Yeah, there is one other thing to add to that, and that is the character experience a change from beginning to end. Now, whether it's a good change or a bad change, that'll vary on the story you want to tell. But that's the fourth heat, as it were.
Yeah, that pertains more to narrative filmmaking, though, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, you can have a story, with other formats, but we're concentrating here. Just want to clarify this for our listeners. We are concentrating on the story based on narrative filmmaking, because that's what we're really discussing here.
Yes. Thank you for the clarification there. But yeah, so and just coming back to what I said about it being a buzzword, I noticed it first on YouTube. YouTube trainers are like, you gotta tell a story, you gotta tell a story, but they never really explain what story is. So then that's why I'm like, okay, well, just saying story doesn't help. So as you and I just said, story is, it has a structure. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and how they're portrayed is obviously, if it's non-linear, that's fine. But the big thing, that fourth heat, is that your character experiences some sort of change through a story.
And that's one of the purposes of In the Weeds, this series, because, I'm constantly telling people the importance and the power of storytelling, why you should focus on your story. And one of the reasons you're here, outside of being so freaking awesome, is the fact that you are able to take that to another level and say, yes, it's very powerful, but let me show you how.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's saying it is one thing, being able to show and demonstrate is another, and that, of course, that's where we want to be. Is like, hey, follow us, and we'll give you the tools to make your story a story, as it were.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned character.
Yeah. Now I want to come back to that in just a moment, because there is another approach to storytelling, and you can do situational stories, and that is where your character has no change. They're simply, it's 5 people in a locked room, and how do they escape? You don't necessarily cover backstory, or none of the characters has a specific change, and those can be satisfying. So don't think that every story has to have a big character change from beginning to end. Know that situational is acceptable. It just, anecdotally, I will say, is far less frequent. So once you as I said, once you figure out this, whether you're telling a story or situation, odds are it'll be a story. Just because there's more meat to them, they're more fun, they're more interesting, more engaging. There's three things you need to look at in approximate order. What's your concept? Who's your character? How many characters do you have? Do you have one main character or 2 main characters, et cetera, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then theme. You need those three things lined up before you can even structure your story. So on the topic of concept, because here's the thing, concept is different from idea. And this is where it gets a little muddy, because there's like just a hair's breadth difference between the two. And something I'm working on with a friend of mine is he wants to write about addiction. So that's the idea. But an idea isn't a concept. So how do you present that? Well, in this case, the main character we're going to follow in this potential story has addiction issues, and we're going to wrap it in a haunted house package so that you elevate it from idea to concept.
It's a tough one to define, Jason, because technically you could see them both as ideas, firefighter, gets stranded in the middle of the night, and he's stuck in a haunted house that burned many years ago and killed somebody. There's a ghost. Mm-hmm. It sounds like an idea, but apparently that's actually a concept, right?
You're right. They can be difficult to quantify, because sometimes the difference between one and the other is just so tiny, but in the whole of a story, it's a huge difference. because it's how you approach it.
Yeah, because I suppose the idea would be the firefighter guy gets stranded at a haunted house. But it's not enough to say that. But then the other part that I added, that's also because I'm a natural storyteller where I went further, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody's thinking that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So we're in our next episode. I'll have much more to say on concept. But I just want to kind of just very quickly go over and be like, hey, this is having the idea isn't enough. You need to basically add to it to make it a concept so you can make a full and complete story.
I'm game.
Cool. Cool. Like I said, it's we'll you and I'll get into the weeds on that one too. Well, of course, once you have your concept, then you need to look at your character, and there's a lot to say about character. But basically, you need to determine who you're following. In the case of Serenity, which we'll be talking about in the future, they have an interesting approach. Because you have River Tam, which is the protagonist, but Malcolm Reynolds is your main character.
Yep.
And the difference is, so in this case,
the protagonist, right?
Yeah. River Tam, the protagonist, gets the story moving, and is generally the source of the plot throughout the story. Malcolm Reynolds, as the main character, has the most to learn because of the influence of the protagonist.
Okay.
And where in the case of Wonder Woman, which we'll also talk about, our main characters are hero, Wonder Woman. So just talking about two different approaches to character. We'll get into that, but the biggest thing you need to think about is what their arc is going to be. Are they going to have a positive arc? Are they going to have a negative arc? Are they going to be better at the end or worse at the end? Or are they going to be neutral? Will they have all the tools they need to make it through? And there's no fundamental change to them from beginning to end.
Wow, my head is spinning with concepts, not ideas.
Well, it's, like I said, it's something I picked up on fairly recently, and it's just one of those little things. It's like, oh yeah, it's so tiny, but it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, well, a lot of these things as a whole have a very undefined line that divides them.
Oh, absolutely,
absolutely. And so it can be hard, but it's in the details, right?
Yep.
That's actually kind of cool. I really the character doesn't always have to be an actual human being.
Mm-hmm.
But the protagonist, in order to, I think, in order to really captivate an audience, the protagonist needs to be a human being so that we can really connect and relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that, or?
Well, I mean, I guess the one thing that comes to mind is Wall-E. As I mean, there's humans in it, but they're tend to be secondary characters, whereas this, it's
the robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he had, it was a he. He had emotions.
Yeah.
So they did it. It's kind of following that.
Okay,
that you need to be able to connect to the humanity of your protagonist.
See, I get what you're saying there, and that's what you're saying about sometimes things can be vaguely defined, but still follow because although Wall-E's a robot, he has recognizable emotions that we can anthropomorphize or empathize with.
Yeah, because otherwise he would just be this thing, and it would be very hard, especially in a 2-hour film, right? Mm-hmm. To connect and feel all the emotions that they want us to, and that's actually part of the plot.
Yeah,
that is why this whole story is taking place, is because Wall-E feels and has emotions, and it's so human-like that even the characters that begin who have no feelings for a robot or dislike them
Mhm.
actually end up loving this robot.
Yeah. I want to say Chappie is very similar too. Yeah, which is yeah. You see something recognizable within it. So yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I get.
I think I may have been confusing Chappie with Wally, actually, because Wally is all robots, right?
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
for the most part,
yeah,
like your three main characters are robots, which is Wally,
yeah.
Eve, and Otto.
But with Chappie, that's a good film. I've watched it more than once. With Chappie, it's he and then another one, right? But it's mainly humans.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
before I get too carried away on that movie,
What could I say? I like robots.
right? Okay, so the character. What was the other part? And we talked about. Okay, so now the theme, right?
Yeah, and that's even though I've kind of got it further down the list. I want to say it's maybe one of the more important ones because it's the question you want to ask or the idea you want to convey as the writer or filmmaker. What do you want to throw out there for people to think about or feel? And we talked about this a little bit in I think the first episode where we got into structure, like the overview of structure, which I want to say was 108, but I could be wrong. I'll put a link in my write up for this episode.
Okay, great.
We talked about theme, and because in Save the Cat they have a beat specifically for theme stated, which I have omitted in mine in favor of somewhere in the first act establishing what your theme is. And the reason I did that is because theme, as part of the art of filmmaking, is interpretive. So the intent you have may not be what the audience gets, because what they get from it is going to be varied based on their own personal experience. So you may want to talk about addiction, and an audience member gets, I can't even think of an example, but gets a completely different interpretation of what your movie.
Depression.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it doesn't matter as long as they get something out of it. They feel something, or they empathize, or whatever.
Now let's define theme a little bit more in detail, because there are visual themes and all sorts of different themes, and we could I just want to clarify it.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. I get that, because I'm not going to lie. I have always had trouble with
Please
theme.
don't lie.
I've always had trouble with theme, and even now, knowing what I know, I've sometimes had to watch a movie several times before I get it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But basically, think of it as it's your central it's your central topic, or the subject you want to talk about, or like I said, if you, as a writer filmmaker, you want to convey a message. What's the central? It's the central core of your story.
So then everything does go into it. For example, when you're color grading your palette, right? In music, the tone of the music, the theme of the music, also plays into setting a theme. If you have, an orchestra, or you have,
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah,
techno or something, all those things help to emphasize the theme. But I think it kind of goes into, it can also set the mood, of the scene. But it's not the overall theme. Altogether, you want to maintain a consistent theme throughout the film, so that the journey for the viewer, right, seems familiar in some way, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm getting really poetic with my words here tonight.
Well, here's the thing. I'm actually okay. I'm gonna give you an example, not from one of the ones we're going to talk about, but the 40-Year-Old Virgin is a really good one, because in that movie,
a comedy.
It is. It's comedy. And look, it's a great movie because it's a comedy, but it's really a story about a very dysfunctional man who shut off part of his own life.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it. But in the first 15 minutes, Andy goes to the store, and one of his coworkers comes up. He's like, Andy, I heard about your situation. It's not about this. It's about love. It's about connection. And that's this employee basically lays out the theme of the movie, is that he's 40 years old and he's a virgin, and all his friends are trying to help him not be a virgin anymore. But it's not about being a virgin that's his problem. It's that by being a virgin, he's cut himself off from having a real connection with another human being. So when we talk about theme, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, it's a funny movie. There's hilarity, but the underlying message is that without love and connection, you can't be a whole person. And maybe that helps define theme. Maybe it doesn't, because.
Well, I'm sitting here going, because I think, I mean, we've had the discussion previous episodes on how there's an underlying, theme.
Yeah.
That you've actually said the word theme.
Mm-hmm.
But when speaking about theme as a whole throughout the entire story, it just seems like the theme is the message, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, as I'm thinking of it, like if I'm making a movie and I say we want to set this sci-fi theme to it, now all of a sudden it's the music, it's the sound, it's the colors, the lighting, everything that we're going to use to make that theme stand out, so that, like I was saying earlier, so that people feel comfortable in it. This is the theme, and then can break. When people are comfortable, when you're riding in a nice, comfortable car, and the road is smooth, you're able to go on your phone. You could write a book on your phone, right? I mean, all these things. When it's a rough road and things are coming out of nowhere and it gets chaotic, you can't do that. And I think that's part of it's a subtle thing when your viewers are comfortably going through the story without really paying attention to the theme, right? Because it's not just super, out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to get the underlying messages and all the other things that you want them to get from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. Because yes, that whole thing, it's, you can say it in dialogue, but when you're doing a movie, in a visual medium, like you said, well, I guess an audio visual medium, is that all the pieces should fit that message, so that it makes sense. So even if you don't say it, or you don't see I've said this before, and once again I've lifted this from Mike at Red Letter Media. You might not have seen it, but your brain did.
Yes, because I was. If you didn't say that, I was going to have to cut you off and say there's the psychological factor of filmmaking, which we discussed as well, which is super important.
Oh yeah.
And and that's actually, I think, one of the most difficult parts of filmmaking, yet it's right there in front of you, right? Because we've been doing it so often. Sometimes we're overthinking the filmmaking process.
Well, and that's one of the biggest problems with being a beginner or amateur or indie filmmaker, is that it's story, it's easy. I've been watching and reading stories my whole life, but when you get down to it, it's not easy. So I mean, we're talking about elements like it's an easy thing, but to put them all together and keep everything in order, it's a complex task. So if you can achieve that,
it's Thanksgiving dinner, or let me bring it back to where other countries can understand. It's like that big breakfast where you've got the eggs. That only takes 2 minutes, but you've got bacon that takes 10 minutes, and then you've got pancakes that take prep time, and then just a few. You got to bring everything nice and warm to the table, because otherwise you don't want cold eggs with your warm this and things like that. And at the same time, you still got to get that coffee out there too. So I'm just saying, it's kind of like that, because you're putting all the ingredients together, you're mixing everything up, and you want everything ready on time for consumption. And when
exactly.
the person eats it, you want them to go, this is exactly what I expected to taste.
Yes, exactly. That you know what, and that's you know what, Susie. It's almost like there's a formula to making a big complex breakfast.
Yeah, isn't there a formula to filmmaking too?
I think there is. I think there is.
Yeah, I love it. This is one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast, because I get to talk to people like Jason, and some of you who are listening right now, you may get to be in this podcast, especially if you're making mobile films and you submit them to our film festival in San Diego. I'm laughing because I sound like I'm plugging this in, but I'm just having this conversation, and it just kind of came up in my mind. It's like, well, yeah, that's one way to get into the podcast, but another way is to just, give me a shout out, let me know what you're doing, and Jason as well. Give him a shout out and talk about all this stuff with him, especially if you have any questions. What else can I do, unless you have something else to say.
I mean, I've always got a lot to say.
Well, go for it, because otherwise I was going to bring up that just a little bit, just a hint about what we did at Clubhouse.
Oh, yes. Yes, you should absolutely do that.
Do want to do it? Because I just had so much fun with that.
Yeah. Well, no, go ahead.
All right. So, okay. All right. So basically what we did is we went into Clubhouse. We made a big deal about the Blair Witch Project, because for me, the Blair Witch Project is everything. No, it's not. But it changed a lot about the industry, right? I mean, if you haven't heard, just Google it really quick, unless you're driving or something. But basically, 3 students in college, film students, go out to make a documentary about an urban legend, right? Called the Blair Witch. And so they go out, they interview people in this town, Burkittsville, right? And they go do that. I think it's in Maryland, right, Jason?
I think so.
Because it's a real town.
Yeah. Burkittsville exists.
Yes. And so they go out there, they interview people, and then they decide they're going to go out in the woods to capture whatever they can, because that's what you do. You're a documentarian, and they're out there. They want to get some B-roll to fit the theme of their story, this documentary. So they go out there, they got a film camera, and they've got a camcorder or something like that. And they have an audio guy that's doing external audio recording, as is usually the case. And so Jason, I asked Jason to go on Clubhouse, and I'm like, I really loved this film, and I had this concept in my mind, like, I wonder if, this was back in 1994 when it was filmed, but I wonder, it came out in 1999,
99,
right?
Yeah.
But I wonder if today, 2021, with smartphones, would it change a lot if we tried to film it, and we were thinking about the story, right? Because this, although it looked like it was, happening all in real life, it actually was a narrative film. It was a bit of a mockumentary kind of type thing. But and I may be wrong with that, but in anyways, it's made to look like this. And the thing is that it was on the news a lot, because the way they marketed this, they actually pretended that these students actually really in real life, got lost in the woods, and they were never found, but they found the footage. And that's how this movie came about. And so I got to experience that because I was in college at the time. I did go into a movie theater and watch this without really knowing whether it was true or not. There were rumors, but I didn't really know. In any case, we did this thing, and Bharat Gokus, who was in our last episode, 110, he was in Clubhouse with us, and Brian, shoot, I forgot his last name now.
God, I was just tweeting with him the other day.
Well, I'm constantly. He was also in one of our more recent episode. Olsen. Okay.
Brian Olsen. Brian Olsen, who I literally tweeted with yesterday.
Well, it just so happens that Brian is he's a mobile filmmaker, but he's also into audio a lot. That's his profession, right? And so it was just ironic. And so what we did, we discussed all this, and then we did a little bit of a role play. So this is where it gets fun. So Jason, I said, okay, Jason, you're Josh, and Brian, you're Mike, the audio guy. Josh was the camera guy. And I'm going to be Heather. And for obvious reasons. And so we're going to have a pre-production meeting in Clubhouse where we decide, now we're going to pretend Blair Witch didn't exist. We're these three characters. Well, we started the show with going back to the future, right? And so now here we are, 2021, and we're plotting how we're going to make this film. But we're going to use smartphone cameras. And so, Jason, explain a little bit about how that went.
It was actually a very interesting thought exercise because from a story perspective, I'm gonna jump to the end for this part. Is that
no?
Well, no, I can need to because no.
No, we're to the end of the conclusion of what we found out.
Well, no, I was just going to say that fundamentally the story itself is virtually unchanged.
Yeah, that was the conclusion.
Yeah, but the conversation really came down to the how to.
That's the thing, because so one of the things we kept butting our heads into is like, well, because in different films that were done at the time, there's things like, oh, well, people get in the car and their car doesn't, they have to go out and crank the car or something weird, like in the old days. That wouldn't work, right? Cars don't do that anymore. There's certain things like that. Yeah. Same with the phone, all these things that change, and they could fundamentally, as Jason said, really change the story, because you can't make that scenario fit from the story back in that time period to today. But what we found out was, really, it didn't change. Like, it could be done almost exactly in the same way. There was only one thing, I think, that really made the change, Jason, and I think that had to do with the GPS and the footage. We were talking because we were looking. We started with logistics of, okay, well, smartphones storage is generally pretty good, which we'll get into. We'll come back to that. But the big question was batteries. Yeah. And
because just the lifespan when you're shooting continuously isn't particularly good, but you can get I have one here. I can't remember the brand name, but it's like $20 for a backup battery, and it'll do it'll do 2 complete charges on my iPhone 12.
Yeah.
So
we would do like the characters, and if you've watched Blair Witch, you would know. Like they're in the hotel room, and they've packed a bunch of batteries and a bunch of gear. So they're like going to war, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
The way that they've packed everything. So we would kind of do the same.
Yeah,
we'd just do it.
We'd have multiple phones just for quickly transfer. Because if you don't have time to stop and dump the footage somewhere, just one phone gets.
Oh yeah, we had a little bit of an argument over dumping the footage, because I was like, no, we were only planning on being here for a couple nights at the most, and then we were going to go back to the hotel, and then we could dump everything. Yeah, and so we got into a bit of a theme over that.
Oh, and it was actually a good conversation, because because initially. And I actually talked about this in the article I'm going to post for that on Medium as well, is that initially, you were against it, Brianna was for it, and I was kind of in the middle, but then I very quickly fell on...
the three bears.
Yeah. Well, I very quickly fell on Brianna's side of bring it with you, because I just thought of other filmmakers I know who cannot wait once the shoot day is done, to start cutting their footage or start looking at their footage. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, a laptop, same thing, reasonable battery. You can get a an auxiliary battery to carry it over. So yeah, I feel like you'd have the laptop. You can very quickly dump your footage and just keep your cameras. Well, I guess not super quickly because Lightning isn't a particularly fast transfer.
No, and also because we shifted into iPads or notebooks or whatever because of all that, including the weight of all these other things that there's a tent, there's some food, water bottles. Or when I was at Comic-Con, I didn't say this at Clubhouse, but when I was at Comic-Con, you have your backpack, and the freaking heaviest thing that I had in my backpack were the water bottles.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing
if
too,
it weren't for that, yeah.
When you look at the original Blair Witch Project and what they like, the big like obviously they had tent, they had their camping gear, but when you switch to mobile, your gear is
yeah,
light years away from how heavy it used to be. You can pack like 5 phones and 5 batteries in like the tiniest of bag, and just switch over.
We talked about a mini like like the those light tripods.
Yes,
well.
yeah, the Manfrotto, what is it? Yeah, anyway,
One of those.
Yeah, the small, like the ones that they collapse to like what, like
Everybody
6
who's
inches
ever
long?
had one always gives me one. I think I must have like 60 of them in a closet somewhere. Oh, Susie does video. Here's a tripod. None of them are really that good either.
So yeah, so the audio gear would be pretty much like your recorder and your boom and your mic, so that wouldn't be super heavy. The phones aren't heavy. Even bringing a laptop isn't heavy. We didn't even talk about drones.
No, we wouldn't want to do that because of the trees out in the woods and branches and all that stuff.
And yeah.
So
and
we
also,
just had that conversation just now.
yeah, exactly. And the biggest question was, what about the GPS? And my answer to that was that there's a plot explanation for that. And in the original Blair Witch, they had their map, but didn't do any good because although it wasn't specifically stated on film, the witch was literally transforming the forest around them, causing them to go in circles. So it wouldn't matter if they had GPS on their phones because the physical location is morphing around them.
Yeah, because that was the only thing that to me was making, and I've lived up and been up in the mountains and things like that. And I know that the cell reception can go away, but you still have the satellite helping you with GPS. And so then we had to come up with a way to still make it work today. And yeah, man, we got through everything. It works.
Yeah. So yeah, with the exception of what they're shooting on, which is ostensibly higher quality cameras than they had at the time anyway.
Right.
And the other thing, they'd have the ability to quickly review footage.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the story bears out exactly the same, regardless of whether you shoot on camcorder or professional camera or cell phone.
And they were set out. I mean, they brought a film camera for a reason. They were set out to do high-end production.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Otherwise, they would have just been okay going into the woods with a camcorder.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of an argument about the sound gear, and I was like, no, we would still bring. Remember, we're plotting this as we're going to do it. Like we're in production, we're in pre-production, and we're plotting how we're going to do this. And me being Heather is like, no, Mikey, you're bringing your audio gear. No matter what, we're going to do external, sound when we're going to capture things with the film camera, right? When we're capturing things for the documentary, because this is the other thing we didn't mention just now, Jason. So in the movie, the footage that they used for the film was shot with their film camera with external sound, but the other stuff was shot with a camcorder.
Yes.
Like documenting them, which ends up being part of the movie anyway.
Yeah.
So we would do the same thing, basically, in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and so the thing, yeah, holy, a little bit of stuttering
Oh,
there.
and we changed another thing. Sorry. Look, I'm getting really excited. We did change another thing. We changed because in the movie, the footage is actually now there's a documentary that came out just about 3 or 4 days before the movie came out into the theaters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that documentary, they basically are like doing this investigation, right? It's an investigative documentary about what happened to these students, you know? And they said basically there was a sheriff, you know, being interviewed, and he was like, yeah, you know, they found this footage uh, in under layers of other things
Yeah.
that were undisturbed, that were hundreds of years old or something.
Yeah, so
And
because even just far down as the sediment layer.
right.
Yeah.
And so we were sitting there going, well, we wouldn't do that. But then we really got creative with that.
Mm-hmm.
We started thinking about how we could get, you know, the footage out with them having to find it buried somewhere and all this stuff. And then what we ended up deciding was, well, basically, what they found, you know, was our backpacks,
Mm-hmm.
the sound equipment, and the cell phones.
Yeah.
And that's how they got everything. But they couldn't find us anymore. Like we were gone.
Yeah. Evaporated.
And so that's yeah, and that's how we came to the conclusion that wow, the story really would not change. I mean, we could almost do it to the letter and it would still work. The only real difference would be these are 3 mobile filmmakers went into the woods.
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, obviously, you know, the people listening to this are obviously have an interest in mobile filmmaking, so it's not so much them we have to convince, but it's a good thought exercise for anyone who's like, oh, you can't make a movie on cell phones. Like, well, yeah, you absolutely can. And you can make it virtually exactly like another movie.
Yeah, and you can make millions if you know how to market it right.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing that we didn't talk about, and how feasible it would be to do something like that today, because it was my experience at the time that I was in college and stuff, and I remember walking somewhere in town where there was one of the wanted, you know, the missing students flyers was on a light pole. Or an electric pole or something like that. It was a wooden pole.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing that and going, I didn't look too much into it. You know, I remember stopping and reading it briefly and then just kept walking. You know, it's like, you know, like missing dogs, right? They put those things. And not thinking too much of it, what happened was I was on campus at school, at the college, and there was a table. There was always, you know, when you're walking from class to class in the quad, there were always, you know, not always, but a lot of times there were some exhibits there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tables that day was people from that college, I believe they were from that college, that were marketing the movie, but they weren't really saying that it was a hoax as far as, you know, a marketing thing, that it didn't happen or anything. And they had some of those flyers and they had those Blair Witch stick figures.
Mm-hmm.
And I grabbed one of those stick figures. And as a matter of fact, we'll use it so you can put it in the article too.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, you know, it was such a, I don't think that today, right, that would work as well. That the purpose of the Blair Witch Project, the original one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of that film being so touching to me, if I want, I don't know, so impressive, right? I was so impressed by it because, and we even discussed this in some of our classes, cinematography class, as a matter of fact. It was because, as the instructor was saying, this movie 20 years from now is going to have changed the film industry
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to marketing, because it was just genius,
Yeah.
you know. And I just think the virality, it went viral. It was one of the first, and at the beginning of our Clubhouse thing, I brought up another viral film that had kind of that same effect, although it was horrible what happened with that one, and that was Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. So I just think that with technology and communication as we have it today, it wouldn't be so obvious. I mean, all anybody would have to do is go on Twitter
Yeah.
and find out. But I think that part wouldn't work. But as far as making the movie itself, all of it would work.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was a good experience to be like, yeah, okay, you know, you know, like I said, you, me, and Brian, we know that it's possible, but to actually discuss and be like, oh yeah, it's possible, absolutely possible.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
I really enjoyed that conversation because, and maybe it's something we should do again with some other films. Pick another film, and do that and have a conversation, a pre-production meeting for a particular film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was done, you know, at least 10 years ago, and say, you know, how would we make that film with a phone, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think that'd be interesting, and you know, definitely anyone who's listening should keep an eye on the socials because Susie posts that we're going to be doing these things a little bit ahead of time. So, you know, feel free to keep an eye on that, jump in and listen to the conversation or contribute as the case may be.
Yeah, we love it when people contribute because otherwise it's just us doing that. But that was the first part of the Clubhouse conversation with Barat and everything was talking about the Blair Witch Project and where we were and why it went viral and all these things and the whole concept. But then that last part where we turned into these characters going out to make the film, right? That was really interesting. And again, the conclusion of that was, we didn't know what the conclusion would be.
No.
You know, it was just at the end that I went, you know, so it's very, very interesting. It was really interesting because in most other films that you do that with, you're going, that wouldn't work today. Mm-hmm. You know, because of the technology and things like that. Like, you know, like going viral because, you know, people were missing out in the woods.
Yeah.
I mean, technically maybe, right? But I just thought that was a really cool twist.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was fun, and yeah.
Yeah, that turned out to be that half our episode we talked about the Blair Witch after all. Oh well.
Well, you know, it's October, so.
Yeah, it is October, by the way. If you guys, you know, one of the things that I love about Halloween, Jason, it's the biggest day for production. Everybody's dressed up. Your set is all around you. And I'm always telling people for Halloween, get out there and start making some movies on Halloween, you know, because it's perfect.
Look at all that production design.
Look.
Production value, pardon me.
Yes. And think about this, you know, most of the kids, right? Because when you're out in public streets, you know, you can film anything.
Yeah.
You know, but you still have to get permission when you're getting kids' faces. Mm-hmm. But all the kids are wearing masks.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know.
Problem
so it's okay.
solved.
So anyway, and you know, how many haunted houses are there, right? Mm-hmm. They're all around you. Yeah, I think Halloween is great for mobile filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Probably underrated.
Well, that's actually one of the things and this is off topic, but whenever I'm talking to people about filmmaking, I'm like, why don't you shoot on phone? Because here in Ottawa, there's great places you can shoot right down in front of Parliament, like in front of all the government buildings. You can shoot anywhere with your phone because they're so
non-intrusive.
Exactly, and here's the thing: you can rehearse your actors. And you can either lav mic them and they can record their audio to their own phones while you're shooting them, or you can just do ADR afterwards. It doesn't, either or. But yeah, as long as you kind of, it's guerrilla style because you need to go in and know exactly who's standing where, who's making what movements, who's saying what. But you can be in and out of a location you'd never get permission for otherwise.
I walked by a restaurant a couple days ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to go in because it was all about chocolates and stuff. Anyways,
Okay.
I wanted to go in there, and the door wasn't opening, and there was a sign that said, "We're filming."
Okay.
And there was a guy there with a big camera and all this stuff. Nothing was changed. It was just the fact that this guy with a huge camera was there with a tripod filming a couple. And I was like, see, now with a mobile phone,
Mm-hmm.
that is not that big a deal.
Well,
Because you
exactly.
can literally, I was thinking about the restaurant, and I was thinking what this is costing this filmmaker,
Mm-hmm.
is all the losses that this restaurant owner
Yeah,
is
for that incurs for that
suffering
time.
through. Yeah, because I could have walked in there, bought things. She has no idea what I would have bought,
Mm-hmm.
but she can just hear ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
The money, ka-ching, ka-ching, just going out, walking past the restaurant. But with a mobile camera, there was this guy from New York, Brian McLean, and Tim Russ was in that
really?
film. Yeah, and one of the things is one of our podcasts. I'll share it with you so you can put the link in there, because I think it'd be a really interesting one. He did everything guerrilla style.
Okay.
And they have restaurant scene shots. He even dumps a body into the water at a pier or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, all the things that you can do, and you are not really bothering anyone. But this restaurant, they were sitting in a restaurant booth, and they're filming a conversation with the phone, and it came out fine. The thing is that you're having a conversation in a restaurant anyways,
Mm-hmm.
and people are always taking pictures and things like that with their phone anyways.
Yeah.
So there was no need for them to, hey, we're making a movie, everybody get out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was
exactly.
no need for that. So I just think Halloween is perfect for it, because not only that, but also everybody's ready for you. All right. Jason, unless you got something else to say, let's call it a day.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna deep dive into those elements that you want to have in place before even getting into structure over the next 2 or 3 few episodes. My first turn doing a co-hosting gig on HBO the Nevers podcast is going to be up this week.
Oh,
It's actually going to be up I guess my time this morning at 10 a.m. Which will be 3 days ago by the time this goes up.
well, yeah, because this will come out on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to get that up and talk about another subject I'm passionate about. So the Nevers
follow Jason.
Yeah.
So that you can stay on top of that before this episode.
I mean, yeah, you should definitely.
We really are doing the whole Back to the Future theme.
I know, right?
In this.
But yeah, no. So that's I said, follow me on my socials and check out HBO the Nevers to listen to me prattle on some more.
Yeah, that goes for me too. I'm looking forward to that.
Check it out. We had a good conversation, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to. Oh, and I also made a video to go along with it. That'll go live at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Wow. So we've got no tricks, but lots of treats.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well,
yes.
Halloween
Yes, it does sound good.
Yeah, and Halloween will pass by the time we get to another episode. So, happy Halloween, everybody.
Yes, definitely. Enjoy
Be safe.
And enjoy the tricking and treating. And my God, I sound so old.
Trick or treat. All right, sounds great. Give me the Snickers. You can keep the licorice candies.
Ugh, hard pass. Or candy corn. Ugh.
Well, sometimes it depends on how desperate I get. That's like the last thing that's left, and you're really craving something. The good and plenties are definitely not the ones that I like at all. I give those away, like give them back to the thing.
Yeah, no thanks. No thanks.
You guys do Halloween there in Canada, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. They do them. They do it all over the world for the most part now. It's just become this tradition. It's a big marketing thing. So of course everybody's going to do it. It's a moneymaker.
Well, so I'll be hitting up Walmart on November 1st for discount chocolate.
Nice. The day after.
That's right. You got to clear that stuff out.
All right. Say goodbye to our listeners.
Goodbye, listeners. Thanks for listening.